to today's Finance and Procurement Coffee Break.
Hey.
I'm Claire, Finance Transformation Expert, and I'm here with Richard, who's a procurement guru and coach and trainer and all things procurement. So today we're going to explore how businesses can optimize their cash flow and also strengthen their customer and supplier relationships through effective supply chain financing strategies.
Right.
So, Richard, first question, you're going to be our expert today on supply chain financing. So let me hit you with it. What are the different types of supply chain financing options that businesses can consider?
Right. I am on slightly safer ground than I was with treasury management in the last one. And hopefully, if you look down here, technology, I'll put them up on the screen as we go through them. But for what it's worth, I absolutely love this. And the reason I love it is because cash flows, getting discounts for early payment, getting cash early while waiting for people to pay. I'm a small business owner. There is nothing more challenging than struggling with, getting payments in. It's the most stressful thing, and it's exactly the same for big companies. So to me, these tools are great. So look, I'll go through them quickly. We'll put them in the description, and hopefully they'll appear on the screen as well. So look, what have we got? Simplest one, purchase order financing. And what we're talking about here is, there's a purchase order from a buyer, there's a finance house or financier gives the supplier a part of that what's going to be paid so that they can fulfill the order, so they're not hitting cash, and the supplier then repays the financier when the buyer pays. So basically it's just getting an advance on cash to enable you not to tie up your cash reserves, which is great. Next one, invoice discounting, slightly more complex because in essence you sell your future invoices to a finance house. So they literally buy what orders you've received. They will then go and deal with getting paid by the buyer, and the price of that is obviously there's a discount, so they'll take a few percentage points of whatever the amount is. Inventory financing is another great one, particularly for businesses that are dealing a lot with stock, so supplying goods as opposed to services, where effectively there is a loan backed by your inventory. So if you've got working capital tied up in stock, then a financier looks at that and says, yeah, okay, there's a value, and if it all went wrong, we would take that in order to recover the debt. But in the meantime, we'll use that as a secure guarantee against money we lend you in order to service your sales. So great system for companies doing, producing real products. Factoring, great. Accounts receivable, literally a finance looks at what you're owed by businesses, buys it from you, and takes on the responsibility of then doing the collections from whoever your customers that owe you money. So again, it's another great way of getting cash based on your accounts receivable, which could be large, particularly, and this is great in particular if you're on very long payment terms. Reverse factoring, very, very similar, which is a finance house will act on behalf of buyers. So they pay the invoices, then the buyers will then pay them back. So effectively it's putting a bank in between you and the buyer, but this time the finance house is acting on behalf of the buyer, not on yours. So you're getting paid, great. The finance house then goes and gets paid somewhere down the track by the buyers. And that's a great system for, companies so that, that are buying in products or services so they don't hit their liquidity, which is a great scheme. Dynamic discounting is the next one. And this is, a really simple agreement between buyer and seller, often with no involvement of a finance house, where literally if you've agreed, I don't know, 90-day payment terms, and the buyer comes to you and says, listen, if I settle at 30 or 60, would you give me a discount on the invoice? Well, actually, as a supplier, you might well say yes, because it's much better to get the cash in quicker for a small hit on the total than to be stretching it out to the full payment terms. So dynamic discounting, a really practical, pragmatic approach to getting cash in, giving a discount. Both parties win. And then obviously, like, as in everything we've talked about, there's a technology in the solution. There are lots of supply chain finance platforms into which, and this being driven a lot by sort of lots of innovation in the fintech market, where there's a setup onto which both suppliers and buyers can register to then find a solution that allows them both to realize or protect liquidity by whatever mechanism works best. So it's almost like going to a supermarket for supply chain finance enabled by technology. And in fact, I was looking at one the other day, which is unbelievably, it's in the creative market. So it's specifically designed in the marketing world, where there are lots of sole traders who are doing bits of content or bits of marketing or bits of technology to enable them to get funding up front through a protected way. So there's so much innovation in the space, but they're all geared around the same principle. How do suppliers get paid earlier? How do buyers get to pay later? How do both parties manage to protect liquidity? So, it's a great scheme of things that you can do.
And one of the things, we often talk about how finance and procurement can work better together. One of the things I would say before I move on to my next question is, I would think about supply chain financing as almost like you think about buying things on different types of credit cards. With some types of credit cards you can get 0% interest. Some credit cards give you cash back. Some have quite a high rate of interest, but maybe you've got no other options and you don't want to take out a loan. And just like with credit cards, when you're looking at this, unless it's to fill a short-term financing gap, I would say it's useful to work with the finance team to work out what's the overall cost of capital per annum. Because if you're doing this for a short period of time, maybe you're willing to pay quite a high price for the financing. But if it's going to be like a long form of bridging a gap in your working capital, then it needs to be, you need to work out what is actually the cost of capital by using this route versus would it be more effective to get a loan, a long-term loan. So that's my only note of caution on using these supply chain techniques. So we've talked about there's lots that can be done, and also they're great in terms of if you want to sell your product, and if you can offer, like, I don't know, any kind of financing help to your customers, that's kind of helping bridge the gap a bit, isn't it? So what sort of benefits do you see as the main benefits of supply chain financing?
Well, obviously I've said I like it. So, I mean, for me, there are 5 really big ones. The obvious one is cash flow, because it protects it for both parties. I actually think it's a really good thing for building supplier relationships as well. In the same way that there is nothing more damaging to a supplier relationship than an argument about payment of an invoice, the opposite's also true. If you get that to work really well and reliably for both sides, it builds trust. It just does. Taking the note of caution, third thing for me is it has the potential to reduce financing costs, particularly if you're having to borrow to protect liquidity. That it might well be that the right scheme allows you to do that in a more affordable way. But absolutely, of course I'd come to finance and I'd ask whether that was the right thing to do. I think risk mitigation, liquidity is a killer. And, if you can do anything to protect liquidity, you're minimizing business risk. Ask any big automotive or manufacturing company that's buying components from small manufacturers who are struggling with liquidity, the cost of putting some kind of supply chain finance in place compared to the cost of what do you do if your supplier of a critical component goes bust, there's no comparison. So it's a real risk mitigation. And do you know what? I also think it's a source of competitive advantage. If I'm a supplier and I'm going to a customer that offers me early payment at a discount, or I've got customers that are themselves small businesses and I'm offering them late payment in return for me at a discount so that I can get cash earlier I'm going to do it. So there are lots of people who will look at that and say, do you know what, if I'm going to commit and put my resources at risk, I'd rather do it with people that are going to actively enable financing. So I think it's a great thing on that front as well.
Yeah. And I think that point about, the relationship's really important, because at the end of the day, if you're trying to stretch out your payment terms as long as possible, and that's hurting your suppliers. I mean, we all heard about some supermarkets in the UK that were notorious to doing that for some of their suppliers, and hasn't been in the papers for a while, but there was a time when they were constantly in the papers for hurting their suppliers. And
we should say that other late payers are available, just so that we're completely neutral, right?
Yeah, but the point is you don't want your suppliers to stop wanting to do business with you, do you? So
no, and do you know what? I mean, look, it's just a reality. I mean, the UK, there's pretty good legislation in place about fair payment and prompt payment terms. And, to be honest, in the UK, most companies are getting down to 45 days or less in payment, which is pretty normal. But internationally, 90 days, 120 days still exists. And even if you're okay with that, that still puts a big burden on liquidity and risk. It just does. So I think you're absolutely right. I think it is a very pragmatic way at a relatively small cost, whichever of the mechanisms you use, to get over the reality of terms whilst and deliver actually a safer relationship, a safer trade.
So tell me, how would you go about implementing supply chain financing? Let's decide you've realised that there is a bit of a gap between when you want to pay and when your suppliers want to receive, or when your customers want to pay you and when you want to receive. Either way, what steps would you go about looking at how to bridge this gap?
Right, I love step-by-step plans. So look, I would go at this here in 5 steps. Right, first step, exactly as you just said, work out if anybody actually wants it. Whether you're a customer or a supplier, go and ask your customers and your suppliers, is this something that you would see as beneficial? And I suspect in most cases the answer will be yes. I might be wrong, but once you know that there's a demand, then it's worth them progressing with the rest of the journey. Second one, you hit the nail on the head earlier. There are lots of options, lots of mechanisms. I did 6 of them. There are other more hybrid versions too. But actually working out which is the right kind of financing, depending on the nature of your business and the nature of your suppliers, is really important. And of course, you've got to look at that again, that cost of capital going through. So take your time to work out what's the best mix. But the third step, which is, go and use technology. Actually, the technology platforms, particularly some of the new sort of fintech startups, they actually offer you pretty much any of the options. It's almost a pick and mix once you're signed up to the platform. So again, that second and third step of what's the right financing option and what's the right technology, actually they go pretty closely together. And then the last two, honestly, you could put these into any step-by-step process, which is communication. And I mean, I know how many times we've talked about communication. but actually making sure that everybody that's involved knows what's going on and how it works, particularly at the start when everyone's going to be a little bit nervous, particularly if they've never touched it before, is important. And then, continuous improvement. Nothing ever works to plan when you first start doing it. So, again, that communication should also include a really good dialogue about, is this working for you? Is there anything we can do to improve it? And then go and make it happen. And be prepared to go right back to the beginning and say, right, did we decide that, the suppliers or the customers that should fall into this, actually, they weren't the right customers. We need to focus it on different ones. Did we choose the right financing? Did we choose the right platform? And just be prepared to go with the flow. But look, as ever, reach out to people before you start and, ask your colleagues, ask consultancies, ask us. Anybody that's put this in place is going to be worth setting up a 20-minute chat, hop online, have a cup of coffee, get their feedback, and begin to get confident on how to do it. But yeah, those would be the 5 steps. Make sure it works for both sides, choose the right financing, link to choose the right technology, talk to people, and be prepared to just get good feedback and then improve what you're doing.
Yeah. And the only thing I'd add to that, just thinking about it, is even though I haven't implemented supply chain financing myself, but when I've done similar projects that are with customers or suppliers, I think it's always used to pilot it with a few select customers or suppliers.
Absolutely right.
And choose ones who you have quite friendly relationships with and are willing to sort of work with you a little bit hand in hand. Because if you can pilot it with some friendly customers or friendly suppliers who are willing to give you that open communication and feedback and kind of help you with it, then once you've finished your pilot and happy it's all working, you can sort of roll it out to more broader.
Look, I agree. That's really good advice. And again, thinking about it, if I took three different scenarios, right? A supplier in distress that's desperate for cash, that's not a good choice for a pilot because there's a good risk they're going to say yes to it. So why would you do that? Going to a big and there are many of them, a global consultancy firm, and inviting them to do factoring for a lower charge, again, it's unlikely to get a warm response. But do you know what? If let's say you're a manufacturing company and you're buying parts from an SME, everything's going okay, but both of you would just like to have a bit more breathing space on liquidity. Actually, that's a great relationship to start to explore because neither of you are in trouble. Neither of you have got the upper hand. It's a mechanism that could improve both of your situations. That's a great place to go.
Well, thanks, Richard. So that wraps up our discussion on supply chain financing options today. We really hope that's useful for our listeners. And as always, do get in touch if there's any topics or questions you'd like to ask. Richard, would you like to wrap up?
Yeah, look, I was thinking what's going to be my big phrase to finish, and I think, look, this is one supply chain financing transcends being a mere financial instrument. How about that? Bit of pseudo Shakespeare. I know, but what do I mean? It's such it is essentially a simple mechanism. It's somewhere along the line, someone gets a margin for making the cash flow quicker. I mean, that's how this works, right? But for all the reasons I said, it's much, much more than that in terms of what it offers all parties either side of a purchase order in terms of being able to do business more safely. So I absolutely recommend, you go and take a look, no matter what size company you are, because I think you'd find actually it would be so well received, if not by all, but by a good chunk of your suppliers that frankly would quite happily give you, take a discount on their invoice for guaranteed cash quicker. I mean, it's for me, it's a no-brainer, but give it a go and let us know what happens. Cool.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. See you next time.